going through old photographs. Maybe they belong to your family. Maybe you found them in a box in the attic or inherited them from someone who is no longer around to explain them. Old photographs. The kind printed on thick paper that has gone slightly yellow at the edges, with that particular faded quality that makes everything in them look like it belongs to a world that no longer exists. You flip through them slowly. Birthdays, holidays, family gatherings in living rooms you half recognize. And then you stop. There is a photograph of a group of people you know, standing together at some occasion, smiling at the camera. You recognize every face in it, except one. At the edge of the frame, half in shadow, stands a girl, young, maybe 10 or 11 years old. She is not smiling. She is not looking at the camera. She is looking directly at someone in the group. Her expression is difficult to read, not quite blank, not quite afraid, not quite angry. Something in between all of those things. You ask around. Nobody knows who she is. Nobody remembers her being there. Nobody can explain how a child that nobody recognizes ended up standing at the edge of a photograph taken inside a private home at a private gathering. And then someone looks closer, and they notice that the wall behind her, the wall that every other person in the photograph is standing in front of, is visible straight through her body. She is not casting a shadow. She was never really there. This is The Girl in the Photograph, a legend that exists at the precise intersection of two of the deepest human fears: the fear of the dead who will not leave, and the fear of discovering that something was present in a moment you thought was safe, documented in evidence you cannot argue with, staring back at you from a piece of paper that has been sitting in a box for 30 years. The legend of the girl in the photograph does not belong to a single story or a single origin. It is a category of legend, a type of haunting that appears across cultures, across decades, across countries, always built around the same foundation: a photograph, a figure that should not be there, and the slow, creeping realization that the moment the camera captured was not as private, not as safe, and not as fully understood as the people in it believed. Photographs hold a unique place in the mythology of the supernatural. From the very beginning of photography in the 19th century, people were unsettled by what the camera could do. It froze a moment in time. It captured light that had reflected off a human face and preserved it indefinitely. In some cultures, early photography was viewed with deep suspicion. The idea that a photograph could capture something of the soul, or that the image of a dead person retained some connection to whatever remained of them after death. Spirit photography emerged almost immediately after photography itself became accessible to the public. Photographers in the 1860s and 1870s began producing portraits that appeared to show ghostly figures standing alongside the living, translucent faces hovering over the shoulders of grieving widows and bereaved parents who desperately wanted to believe their loved ones were still present in some form. Many of these photographs were deliberate frauds, produced by double exposure techniques. But they sold. They sold in enormous quantities, because the desire to see the dead in photographs was powerful enough that people paid for the possibility, even knowing it might not be real. That history matters, because the girl in the photograph legend inherits all of it. Every story of an unknown face appearing in a photograph draws on a century and a half of human anxiety about what cameras can and cannot capture, about whether a lens pointed at a room sees only what the human eye sees, or whether it records something more, something that was present but invisible, something that had been there all along, waiting for the right conditions to become visible. The most well-known version of this legend in the modern era centers on a specific and deeply disturbing story that has circulated online and in horror communities for years. A family discovers an old photograph taken at a child's birthday party. A joyful, ordinary image of children gathered around a cake. In the background, partially obscured by the other children, stands a girl that nobody in the photograph recognizes. The family asks everyone who attended the party. Nobody knows her. Nobody remembers a child matching her description being present that day. The investigation into who she is leads them to old records, and what they find is that a young girl had died in the house years before the party took place. A girl whose photograph in a school record matches almost exactly the face staring out from the background of the birthday picture. She had come back, not to threaten, not to harm, simply to be present at a party happening in what had once been her home, in what had once been her space, among children playing in rooms she had played in herself. That version of the story is terrifying not because of what the ghost does, but because of what she wants. She is not there to frighten anyone. She is there because she cannot leave, because the house is hers in some way that death has not been able to undo. And her presence in the photograph is not a warning. It is evidence of a loneliness so absolute and so permanent that she will stand at the edge of strangers' celebrations just to be near the warmth of the living for a moment. That is a different texture of horror entirely. Not the monster in the dark, not the threat behind you on the stairs. The quiet, impossible grief of something that should be gone but is not. Something that does not know how to leave, or cannot, or will not, and documents itself in the margins of your happiest moments without you ever knowing it was there. Other versions of the legend are darker. There are stories of photographs in which a figure appears that seems to be watching the subjects with clear and deliberate intent. Photographs taken in empty houses where a face appears in an upstairs window. Photographs taken at family gatherings where a figure stands just outside the circle of people, head turned slightly, positioned in a way that suggests it arrived with a purpose the people in the photograph would not have welcomed. In these versions, the girl in the photograph is not grief. She is something older and colder, something that was drawn to the gathering for reasons the living cannot access, something that left evidence of itself in the one medium that does not lie: the photograph, the captured light, the frozen moment that now sits in a box for 30 years waiting for someone to look closely enough. The legend gained enormous traction in the internet age because photographs became something everyone produced constantly and stored digitally, and digital photographs could be examined with a precision and a level of zoom that printed photographs never allowed. Suddenly, every family photo album became a potential source of evidence. Every photograph taken in a crowded room, every shot of a party or a gathering or a family holiday became something that could be enlarged, sharpened, and scrutinized pixel by pixel for the face that should not be there. And people found things, or believed they found things. Online communities dedicated to paranormal photography filled with images purporting to show figures in windows, faces in mirrors, shapes in shadows that resolved under examination into something that looked uncomfortably like a person standing where no person should be standing. Most had rational explanations. Pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find faces in random patterns, accounts for a significant portion of them. Double exposures, reflections, photographic artifacts, the way compression algorithms sometimes create shapes in dark areas of digital images. But not all of them. Some of them remain genuinely difficult to explain, and the ones that remain difficult to explain are the ones that circulate endlessly, passed from forum to forum, platform to platform, generation to generation, because they carry that particular quality that the best paranormal evidence always carries. The quality of almost. Almost explainable. Almost dismissible. Almost something you can walk away from without it following you. Almost. Because the thing about the girl in the photograph is that you can never fully close the door on her. You can explain spirit photography. You can explain pareidolia. You can explain double exposures and digital artifacts and the way shadows and light conspire to create shapes that the human brain interprets as faces. But you cannot explain the specific cold feeling you get when you look at a photograph of people you love, taken at a moment you remember as safe and happy and fully understood, and you notice for the first time a face at the edge of the frame that you have been looking past for 30 years without seeing. A face that is looking back at you. A face that has been looking back at you since the moment the shutter closed. So go find your old photographs, the ones in boxes, in albums, tucked in the back of drawers. Take them out and look at them slowly. Really look at the backgrounds, the windows, the shadows in the corners of rooms, at the edges of the frame where the light gets thin and the detail gets soft. Look at every face. Make sure you know every single one. And if you find one you do not recognize, put the photograph down and do not look at it again after dark. If this one got under your skin, hit subscribe, because we go deep into the legends, the photographs, and the darkness that documents itself in the margins of your life without asking permission. Drop a comment below and tell us which story you want us to cover next. Until then, be careful what you look for in old pictures. You might find it looking back.